Welcome to The State of Us. Real people with honest opinions and the future of responsible media. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Welcome and thank you for tuning in. We're so glad you're here today. We're looking at the Speaker of the House and what's going to happen as we head into the new year. So there's a lot going on right now, especially these past few days that have developed around this conversation. So we're really excited today to have back on the show Ryan Clancy, the Chief Strategist for No Labels. Thanks for being here, Ryan.
Thanks for having me, Justin.
Always a pleasure. And we've also got Lance Jackson, our senior historian, on today's episode as well.
Good morning, Ryan. Nice to have you with us.
Okay, so we'll get right into it. Ryan, there's been a lot of different things going on. The last time we spoke, we were talking about the Speaker Project and what No Labels was looking to do there to try to make the Speaker more bipartisan and, work better. Really not just the Speaker, but by helping do some things that would make the Speaker more effective, in turn making the House more effective as well. So give us kind of an update on what's going on there and what the focus is now.
Well, the big news is we had a signature victory here over the last couple of weeks when Nancy Pelosi, who is likely to be the next House Speaker, agreed to some pretty significant rule reforms at the behest of the Problem Solvers Caucus, which of course No Labels inspired the creation of, and that we think is going to finally clear the way for some bipartisan ideas to get a fair hearing and have a fighting chance to become law in the next Congress.
Sounds great. So what does this look like? I know last time we spoke, we went over some particulars. How different is this from what you guys at No Labels were initially envisioning?
Well, look, if you go back to when we spoke over the summer, the genesis for this was this bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus we've talked about on the show before, with 40 or so members evenly divided between the parties. They worked over the course of this Congress 4 different times. They actually got to yes on bipartisan ideas having to do with immigration, with infrastructure, with healthcare, with gun safety. And they are ideas that if they ever got a vote in the House, they very likely would have passed. The problem was they never got a vote. They never got so much as a committee hearing, and that was a consequence of the rules of the House. And rules that in particular gave a lot of power to the Speaker, to the exclusion of everybody else, and a lot of power to fringe ideological groups like the Freedom Caucus, which had effective veto power to kill off any bipartisan deals. And so early in 2018, No Labels, as you mentioned, started mobilizing people behind our Speaker Project idea, which was an effort to use the election of the next Speaker as a leverage point to change House rules, because a Speaker needs 218 votes, and they can't become Speaker until they get that. And so after the November elections, with the Democrats having a narrow majority to get over the top, Nancy Pelosi needed some support from these problem solvers who, as a condition of that support, said, we want real rule changes, and they got them.
We have an article here from the New York Times from November 28th, and it just said a deal was reached with the Problem Solvers Caucus, whose 9 Democrats were withholding their support as they pushed for rules changes. And I wondered at the time, so that was the deal that was made for their support that Pelosi made, was to make some of these rule changes so it'd be easier to bring bipartisan laws to the floor?
Yeah, that's correct. And the interesting thing, Lance, is that there was unfortunately a lot of misinformation about the intent and goals of what the problem solvers and, by extension, No Labels were doing. So, as I know both of you are aware, there is a group of Democrats who have said they don't ever want to vote for Nancy Pelosi, and right. Where they go here is still uncertain. A lot of them made that commitment during their campaigns. Well, No Labels and the problem solvers had never been a part of that group. We're not part of some anti-Pelosi cabal. But what happened was the problem solvers got grouped into this anti-Pelosi effort, and it was never that. In fact, if you think about when No Labels started pushing for rule reforms, it was early 2017 or 2018, but we released our Speaker Project over the summer. Subsequently, the problem solvers released their own rules reforms called Break the Gridlock, which had a lot of the same goals, all the same goals actually, but a lot of the same ideas as within our speaker project. And then in September, about 20 of them went on the record and said, we're not voting for any speaker who doesn't support these rule reforms. Now, that was months before the election, before we knew which party was going to control Congress, before we knew who the possible speaker candidates were going to be. So this has been a long-standing effort, and it was an effort that would have continued this way if Republicans would have held the majority, and Kevin McCarthy was competing to become speaker, then the Republicans in the caucus would have held out to make these demands.
So, Ryan, I wonder, as we're talking about this, as Lance highlighted that article and some others like it, I wonder what extent people realize what this means and why it's important. I mean, what sense do you all have of the public's perception of the House, other than that it's generally not been working very well the past so many years?
I mean, I think the thing is that I don't think the public will realize how important this really is until we get into the next Congress. Because, House rules, we knew this even when we started pushing for this. They're very obscure, it's very inside baseball. And to the extent that most people think of Congress being dysfunctional, it's just sort of a pox on all your houses kind of thing. It's you all stink and you're all hyper partisans and you can't do any work. I think what people didn't quite appreciate was the role that these rules played in empowering these really narrow groups in the House to subvert the will of everybody else. So let me just be really specific about one of the rule reforms that the problem solvers got Pelosi to agree to. And it sounds common sense, but this was not allowed in the current Congress. One rule they got was that if they can get any bill with 290 co-sponsors, then, through a bunch of parliamentary procedure, it makes it much easier for that bill to actually get a vote. And that sounds simple and common sense to most people. I mean, most people probably think, in the House, a bill passes with a simple majority. So if something gets 290 co-sponsors, of course it passed, except it doesn't. Because whether a bill even gets considered is entirely at the discretion of the speaker. So why is that a problem? Here's why. Because if you look at Paul Ryan, he depended on a group like the Freedom Caucus, which only had 30 members, to stay as speaker. Otherwise, they could withdraw their support and, kind of take away his speakership. So what that meant is he was reluctant to put forth bills that would sail through the House.
Do you
but that
have
the
something you want to
Caucus
ask
hated.
next? Okay.
And absent these rule reforms, you'd have the same problem in the next Congress. So Nancy Pelosi would be more reluctant to put forth bills that could pass, but that the Progressive Caucus might hate. So the easiest way for people to understand why this is important is if you look at this previous Congress. If the rules the problem solvers just negotiated for the next Congress were in place in this one, then we almost certainly would have had bipartisan bills on infrastructure, on gun safety, on immigration, and on health care. And I think that really surprises people. But that's the reality. There is agreement there, but the rules conspire to prevent, even when the vast majority of the members in the House wanted to agree, they weren't allowed to do it.
Just for everybody listening, if they didn't hear the first episode, I know Lance has got something here, but just as a recap, because something that Lance and I talked about is, we had wondered to what extent, well, the system, it used to work, or at least it used to work better. And in fact, as we talked about on the last episode, in the last 10 or 20 years or so, it's progressively gotten worse as these Congresses take over and they've made the rules worse as they've gone. So it's not just, and I'm highlighting that because I don't think, like you had said, Brian, the intricacies of the House are not something that most people probably find very interesting, but it's important to understand that each time they come in, they can throw out the rules and start over. They can keep most of them. They can do most of whatever they want with the rules. And as that's progressed, we actually have pretty different rules from some of the way things used to be.
Yeah, on the first day of Congress, the first two things they do is they elect a speaker and they pass a rules package. And that rules package governs what's going to happen over the next 2 years in terms of, how is legislation going to get considered? What are how to What's the process for whether certain amendments are able to be offered to legislation and not others? So it's really important. And I mean, look, I think probably the most bracing example for people about how screwed up the place had become is, ironically, probably the most pernicious thing in the whole House, the most pernicious rule, is something called the Hastert Rule. But ironically, it's not actually a rule. So let me, it's a little confusing, but let me just back up real quick here. Dennis Hastert was the former House Speaker. He's now disgraced. He's in jail. I won't go into why that's the case. But in the mid-90s, he started a practice which has kind of remained common since then. And what it said is as Speaker, I am not bringing any bill to the floor that does not have a majority of the majority's support. And there were a bunch of actual rules that underpinned that and made it easier for him to do that. But what that meant in effect is you could have a bill supported by 100% of the minority party and 49% of the majority party. But if 51% of that majority, half of the half in a lot of cases, didn't want a bill to be considered, then it didn't get considered. And that's how you got situations like, if you look at an issue like immigration, where in 2006 and 2013, the Senate actually passed comprehensive immigration bills with 68 votes in one case and 62 in the other. But those bills never even got votes in the House. They would have passed. They would have passed, and George Bush II and Barack Obama would have signed both those bills if they passed. They never even got brought up for a vote in the House. And it was because of these rules that just empower these fringe groups. So, people who are listening, they don't have to care about the rules. But I think that basic idea that like a quarter or a third of the House can subvert the will of everybody else, like strikes them as just blatantly undemocratic. And it is. And so that's what some of these rules are trying to change.
Ryan, do you have a feeling on, with all of the incoming freshmen, and many of them from swing districts, districts that historically had voted Republican and the Democrats narrowly winning, do you have a feel yet, or do the problem solvers have a feel yet on the leanings of these new members towards these ideas and these rules changes? I mean, because it seems like this would be something they would want to buy into, because they've been elected to try to have some bipartisanship, and they're from districts that are, split down the middle, and they're going to be judged in 2 years. I mean, it's tough to talk about re-election, but do you have a feeling, I guess, going back to where all these freshmen are going to fall on these rules changes? Are they going to be supportive of these ideas and everything? Because they're 50 some, right? I mean, sure. That's a good size number when you talk about making a change.
Right. Well, Lance, for starters, these rule changes, are will almost certainly be implemented on the first day of the next Congress. Now, then the question becomes okay, well, what does this Congress actually do? In other words, now that a door has been opened for some bipartisan legislation to happen, will these members want to actually walk through it? And that gets to an interesting tension. And you just sort of pointed out, is that this was a big win for Democrats in 2016. And in a lot of respects, it's, considered a rebuke of President Trump. But one of the real interesting tensions you're seeing in the Democratic Party right now is, if you look at the seats that Democrats actually won in 2018, a lot of them were seats exactly like the ones you described. So either swing districts or districts that voted for Trump in 2016, but that a Democrat managed to get this time around. Now, the character of those Democrats who won those seats, they are much more moderate and sort of the center than some of the folks on the far left of the party. So where some of this tension is going to be is, there are some people on the left of the party, and some of them are in Congress, who see this election as a mandate to, okay, not only is this a rebuke of Trump, but this is an endorsement of the entire left-wing progressive agenda. as somebody like Bernie Sanders
right.
or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York sees it. And there are a lot of Democrats who don't feel that way,
right?
Who didn't get elected to implement a left-wing agenda, but got elected to solve some problems. And if they come back 2 years from now, and they're seen as, not as kind of problem solvers who are trying to get things done, but just as like an extension of this, hyper partisan left wing, then they'll probably lose their elections, and they don't want to do that.
Exactly. So do the power brokers that it seems to anyway, when you name some of those names and names that I'm thinking of, tend to lean left for the Democrats? Do the Democratic power brokers realize that most of us out here, whether we're Democrats or Republicans, just want some problems at least dealt with that haven't been dealt with in a long time, and we're not worried about getting all of necessarily what we think is right? We just like to see some movement. Do the power brokers in the Democratic Party understand that, or are we going to get gridlock within the Democratic Party with this?
I mean, I think they do. I really do. Because, look, Nancy Pelosi is a great example of, she sort of gets caricatured as, she's this Democrat from San Francisco. And,
right, exactly.
She's right. On the other hand, she's a really pragmatic, talented politician. People forget that her father was a, Democrat from Baltimore.
Yes.
City politics. Somebody who understood kind of the hard-nosed vote counting. What does it take to win? What does it take to
the
govern?
Old machine type, city machine type Democrats.
Yeah, and there were ugly parts of that. I'm not, saying that
no, right,
that's the model, right? but there's a pragmatic side of Nancy Pelosi that I don't think maybe she gets enough credit for. And in striking this deal with the problem solvers, I think she's recognizing that. I think the thing, look, people who are involved with no labels, even as they're part of no labels, they are Democrats, they are Republicans, they have their own identities. But me personally, I'm a Democrat. I came up in Democratic politics. And so I don't, take a backseat to anybody in my belief in wanting to advocate for some really critical Democratic priorities. I think where the problem solvers, where no labels may differ from some people who are on the left, is I believe we need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. Mm-hmm. That there are certain things that Democrats can and should fight Republicans on, and shouldn't be apologetic about that. But there are other things, infrastructure, the opioid crisis, certain elements of immigration, criminal justice reform. There are agreements to be had, if we want to look for them. And so that's, I think that's where most of the country is. I think that's where No Labels wants us to be, is that I think I've said this before, that, we're not naive about the differences between Democrats and Republicans. And, we don't think these differences can be papered over with nice words about civility. I mean, there's on any given 10 issues, maybe we really, at this point, realistically can't get that far on 7 or 8 of them. But the problem is those other 2 or 3, where there actually is a chance. But it's just the rampant tribalism, the sort of belief that, you know what, even though I substantively could get to yes on this, I hate my opponent so much that I can't bear the thought of working with them and maybe even giving them a victory. So it's so depressing. I mean, that is one of the things we hear sometimes on the Hill from the people in the problem solvers, that they'll have others in their own party and say, what are you doing? Why are you working with these people on the other side? You're going to give them a win. The response from the problem solvers is, I'm governing.
Exactly.
I thought that's why I'm here. But so there's just this tribal mentality sometimes. And
I'm just excited being an older guy. I remember when they used to work together, and so I'm excited. This excites me because I see the possibility of maybe getting some movement on these issues. As President Reagan said, I don't need to get everything the first time. If I can just get some of it and then I get a little bit more down the road or what, I'm just tired of not seeing any movement on any of these issues that you've mentioned because of the tribalism. And this sounds like something that is going to at least get everybody off of dead center and try to get something done, which will benefit the country. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican and you don't get all of what you want, at least we're going to attempt to improve the situation instead of just staying on dead center and doing nothing.
I think it's also a good time to mention what you and I are trying to do on the State of Us and what TrueChat's working to do as a whole, because while it's not, exactly the same, I think it speaks to part of where we're at and where we have to go if we hope to get things changed.
To that, TrueChat's mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And this is what we're doing today. I think we're getting there and we're finding out it's not Democrats or Republicans. It's, wow, we have a large group of people in Congress, in the House, that have gotten almost a bad rap, so to speak, because they haven't been allowed to do their job. And now it sounds like they're going to at least have the opportunity to do their job. Now they just have to take that opportunity, take that first step.
I've been writing a whole bunch of stuff. Lance can see I've taken notes the whole time because we may have to have another show. I doubt there's enough time to get through everything left that I want to ask or talk about because there's a lot. I was doing a little research, Ryan, and I know, I think it's great that we're going to see some changes here because it's certainly much needed. And hopefully everybody listening understands why that is and has a better understanding today of it's not necessarily all of the representatives' fault because many of them have been willing and would like to pass some of this stuff. Like you highlighted some of the biggest issues that we spend all this time talking about: infrastructure, gun control, immigration, healthcare. Those are 4 pretty big ones. And there were all things that could have improved those in a way that would help move the country forward. But sadly, they weren't able to take place because of the way things are structured. And a little history. I'm kind of stealing Lance's spotlight here. He's usually our history reference guy, but I bet that a lot of people probably don't know that for the first 60 plus years, about 63 years of our country's existence, the speaker was actually elected by ballot instead of by roll call vote. And I'm wondering, just kind of in a hypothetical situation, Ryan, if that was something that was considered as far as changing the way the speaker's elected. And I'll add one more thing to this, so I'll let you kind of take them on both at the same time. The other thing is the Constitution doesn't require that the Speaker of the House be an elected member of the House. So, in other words, if they wanted to elect Lance or Ryan to be Speaker, hypothetically they could. Now, it's never happened, but there's no prerequisite. So I just wonder, in the spirit of the Speaker leading the House and speaking for the House, not just the majority, is there any practicality to those things in the modern day? And were they considered? And if so, why weren't they part of it?
So, the short answer is when we started out this project, when the label first started doing research into the Speaker Project, we looked at both the things you described, that the actual process for electing the Speaker, and then the fact that, to your point, it doesn't have to be somebody from within the House. We looked at those ideas, but we discarded them ultimately because we weren't naive about, that those would be huge lifts. Whatever the theoretical merit of that, it would very likely be perceived as an attack and an attempt to undermine the actual people who were running. And so we didn't want to do that because we didn't want to be perceived as an antagonist. So part of the delicate balance here, when you think about these rule reforms that got through is, look, I don't think there's any question that Nancy Pelosi agreed to some rule reforms that, if it were up to her, she probably wouldn't have agreed to because they dilute her power a little bit. On the other hand, there were some reforms that she liked because, for example, there was this one provision called the motion to vacate. And it was the bottom line is, if you're familiar with a parliamentary system, they have these no confidence votes where you can kind of just take down a prime minister. Well, that power was vested in any single member of Congress. Mm-hmm. And the Freedom Caucus used this all the time. One of the people who works with us used to call it the sword of Damocles, always hanging over the head of the speaker, who knew that if I inch a little too far over here to do something bipartisan, I'm going to get one of these agitators try to pull down my speakership. Well, one of the rules reforms they got makes that much harder. So it can't just be any one fringe member trying to pull a speaker down. It's a much higher bar to clear. And so ultimately, to answer your question, we didn't reach for some of those more seismic changes to who's going to become speaker or how the speaker was elected, because we were looking for something really tangible and concrete that we knew that, look, let's focus on what we have the power to do. And at this point, we're not looking to bring a speaker from the outside. We're not looking to completely upend the way speakers have been elected. We just want to make sure that whoever is elected with a set of rules that creates a different kind of Congress that can actually do something.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And thank you for, I was kind of assuming that it was something along those lines. I know you all have a great group of people who can come up with some very thoughtful ideas. And obviously both of those, proposing that somebody who isn't an elected official serve as speaker, regardless of, like you said, whether or not it's a good idea because of the nature of what it is, because it would break with the way every speaker, the qualifications that every speaker has had, it would possibly distract from the ultimate end goal. And it's, I think at the end of the day, right, the goal here is to let the leader lead and be more representative of the House as a body, as opposed to just the majority. Give them that freedom that if they want to reach across the aisle, they can. And even if they don't, if a majority of the body disagrees with the speaker, they're not totally handicapped in being able to do anything at all. So yeah, I think it's always, better to get something instead of nothing. That's how we move forward. It's that the nature of compromise, right? We can't just get everything we want all the time.
Well, I think that speaks to how No Labels tends to approach reform in general. Is that why we know there's so much frustration, and oftentimes, as a consequence, people want to reach for really radical solutions. It's like the two parties are so corrupt. We need a third party. We need to totally change the way we elect people, and those ideas are all worth discussion, and we should debate those things. But I think the way we look at it is, in the meantime, so as we're working to build a better system, in the meantime, how do we make the system we have actually work? And that's what No Label spends a lot of its time doing. It isn't always the most exciting. It isn't always the most headline grabbing, but it's what is the practical, incremental stuff that we know we can do. And even that's hard. As bad as things are. That's really hard. This was a huge lift. But if we can start to make some of these changes that will make things better, then it kind of starts to create more of a virtuous cycle where our leaders are working together and getting some things done. And then that kind of creates an opening for them to do more of that, as opposed to what we have now, which is a vicious cycle, which is where they do nothing and everybody gets more frustrated and more polarized. And that actually, in and of itself, makes it harder for them to do anything in the future.
Well, you've got Lance and I's attention for sure. And I think, Lance, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we're big believers in that same kind of mentality of, at the end of the day, we got to do something. And I think, as we understand it, and hopefully as our listeners understand it, this is certainly better than what we had.
I'm excited to see what the House does with these rules changes now that they have the opportunity to bring some legislation and have some votes. That I certainly hope that they take that opportunity to push the process along and put some things on the president's desk to force him to either sign them or veto them or do something. Yes.
Look, I think what you just described, that's what we want. Is that okay? There's, like, as I said before, there's been a door that's been opened. Now these leaders in Congress have a chance to walk through that door. And then to what you just mentioned, there is one final part of this. Look, let's be honest. President Trump has not seemed particularly interested in bipartisanship these first couple of years. And so he's got a real decision to make over these next 2 years. I mean, it's kind of a binary choice. So, he can sort of hope to double down on the base, and then the Democratic, presidential candidates will respond in kind, and we will everything will get worse.
Right.
And everybody will get more angry, and everything will become more divisive. Now, again, not naive. We're going to have a pretty strong contrast in this election. I don't think anybody has any question about that. And we're not trying to prevent that. What we are saying is that we have got to give it a shot here, at least in this 2019, before the campaign takes over everything, to do some things.
Yep.
And, you look at an issue like infrastructure, where, President Trump has said, he's a builder. He wants to rebuild the country. Well, Democrats want that too. Yep. So there's not really much of an excuse for you to at least not try to get to yes on that.
At least put some things on his desk for him to publicly say no to, or say yes to, and then we get off of dead center and get the ball rolling and get things going. It's at least we'd have some answers instead of just sitting here twiddling our thumbs waiting for something to happen. At least we'd have something going on.
For sure. That is progress. In other words, hey, hey, Congress, do your job, pass bills, and then Trump will be able to prove whether in fact he's willing to do deals.
That's right.
Because if they pass good bipartisan bills and he vetoes them, then that reveals that he isn't interested in making deals. And at least we have clarity about that.
Exactly.
If he is willing to sign them, then that's great. We finally have some bipartisan bills that pass.
The phrase, the slogan that No Labels, has used or was using for a while, the make government work idea it's just very appropriate in the idea of we're not, like you said, we're not really asking to fundamentally change how governments work. We just want it to work closer to the way that it's designed to work. Let the representatives in the House really have real live say in what's going on and send those kind of bipartisan things to whomever the president is and go from there. So we really appreciate having you on, Ryan. And for those people that want to get involved, the best option is nolabels.org. Is that where they should head?
Yes, sir.
Okay, wonderful. Well, so go check it out. For those of you that want more information, nolabels.org, they've got good resources there, and you can find all their social media as well. And we appreciate having Ryan here today. I'm sure we'll have him back on again at some point as we kind of see what's next in 2019 and how these rules make a difference. Lance, people want to listen to TrueChat podcast. Where can they do that?
Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere that fine podcasts are promoted.
Excellent. So find us, let us know your thoughts at TrueChat.org, social media, and like Lance said, everywhere that fine podcasts are found. Thanks again, Ryan, for being on.
Thanks, guys.
For The State of Us on TrueChat in Urbana, I'm Justin T. Weller.
And I'm Lance Jackson.
Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time on The State of Us. Be the change.